The boy's face went red, and he did not look down. That was the part the auditorium would remember later, not the laughter, not the lieutenant's voice, not the 230 students sitting in folding chairs who watched it happen. What they would remember was that the 14-year-old boy standing alone at the front of the room, in a shirt he had ironed himself that morning, did not drop his eyes. He held them level, fixed somewhere on the back wall, the way a person holds their gaze when they are being publicly humiliated and have decided that the only thing they can still control is whether or not they flinch. Lieutenant Richard Hargrove stood 3 feet from him at the podium, arms crossed, his drop dress uniform carrying the precise number of ribbons required to impress a room full of high school students in Ridgway, Colorado. He had been speaking for 40 minutes about military service, discipline, and what it takes to wear the uniform. Then a freshman named Ethan Cole had raised his hand during the question period and said, quietly and without bravado, that his mother had been a Navy SEAL. The room had laughed. Not all of it. Enough of it. Hargrove had smiled. The particular smile of a man who has found an opportunity to demonstrate authority at someone else's expense, and told the boy, loudly enough for every seat in the auditorium to hear, that there was no such thing as a female Navy SEAL. That lying about military service was a serious matter, and that if his mother had told him that story, she had either been confused or had been telling tales that did a disservice to the men who had actually earned the trident. Ethan had not sat down. He stood at the microphone, alone, and he did not look away. Nobody in the auditorium spoke. Not the teachers along the wall, not the principal in the second row, not the 200 students who had heard exactly what the lieutenant said and who could see exactly what it was doing to the boy standing in front of them. Then the door at the back of the auditorium opened. A woman walked through it. A German shepherd walked beside her. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end, because what happened next in that auditorium is something that changed the way every person in that room understood the word courage. We read every single one of your comments. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Cole, retired, United States Navy, had not planned to be at Ridgway High School that morning. She had been at the VA clinic in Montrose for a routine appointment on her left knee, the one that had been rebuilt with titanium hardware after a rooftop insertion in eastern Syria, had ended with a 4-story fall and a landing that the field surgeon had later described, with the dark humor endemic to military medicine, as impressive in the wrong direction. She had received a text message from Ethan at 10:47 that morning. It read, "Mom, they're saying you lied." She had driven 43 minutes without stopping. Sarah Cole was 38 years old and carried herself with a particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have spent years in environments where excess motion is a liability. She was 5'8", lean and angular, with the functional musculature of a distance runner crossed with a climber. Shoulders that were broader than most people expected. Forearms corded with the kind of definition that comes from years of carrying loads that most training programs consider beyond female physiology. Her hair was dark brown, cut to her jaw, practical, and pushed behind her ears in a way that suggested she had stopped thinking about it a long time ago. Her face was composed of planes rather than curves, high cheekbones, a jaw that held firm when the rest of her expression chose not to reveal anything, and a thin scar that ran from the outer edge of her left eyebrow to her temple, where a piece of fragmentation from an Eid in Helmand Province had drawn a line she had never bothered to conceal. Her eyes were dark, nearly black in low light, and they held the quality that every person who has looked at genuinely dangerous things long enough eventually develops. A steadiness that is not calm so much as it is the permanent residue of having been afraid in places where fear was not optional, and having learned to function inside it, without letting it make decisions. She was not large. She was not physically imposing in any way that a room would notice first. What the room noticed first was the way she moved, or more precisely, the way she didn't. There was no wasted gesture, no adjustment, no self-consciousness. She walked through the auditorium doors and down the center aisle the way water moves through a channel it has carved itself, and everyone in that room understood, before she spoke a single word, that she belonged to herself completely. She had been one of the first women to complete basic underwater demolition/SEAL training at Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, 3 years after the Defense Department opened all combat roles to women. She had completed Bud-S in a class of 142 candidates, of whom 26 graduated. She had been assigned to a SEAL platoon and had deployed 4 times, twice to Afghanistan, once to Syria, and once to a location in the Horn of Africa that she had signed documents agreeing never to discuss. She held a Bronze Star with Valor for actions during a compound raid in Nangarhar Province, in which she had provided suppressive fire for 11 minutes while her team extracted a wounded operator under direct enemy contact. She held a Purple Heart for the knee. She had completed 50 documented combat missions across her 4 deployments, 50 operations in which she had carried the same load, faced the same fire, and made the same decisions that the men beside her made, and had done so with a level of competence that her team lead had summarized in her final evaluation with a single sentence. Sipo Cole is the operator I want on my 6 when the plan falls apart. She had left the Navy 2 years ago, after the knee made it clear that another deployment would require a replacement she might not recover from. And she had moved to Ridgway because the mountains reminded her of the places she had been trained to fight in, and because the silence of the San Juan Range was the kind of silence she understood. Not empty, but watchful. She raised Ethan alone. She did carpentry and trail maintenance for the county. She did not talk about her service unless someone asked, and very few people asked, because Sarah Cole was not the kind of person who made others feel comfortable enough to probe. She had Ranger. Ranger was a 7-year-old German Shepherd who weighed 82 pounds and whose coat ran deep black along his saddle and spine before warming to rich amber along his chest and legs like a gradient painted by someone who understood that beauty and function are not opposing qualities. His left ear was clipped, the top quarter missing where a piece of shrapnel had caught him during a vehicle-borne eye detonation outside Jalalabad that had killed the vehicle's driver and left Ranger with a wound that the veterinary team at Bagram had closed with 14 stitches and a prognosis that he would never work again. He had worked again. He had completed 2 more deployments. He moved with the deliberate precision of an animal who had been trained to clear rooms, detect explosives, and track human beings across terrain that would break civilian dogs in an hour, and who now walked beside a woman through a high school auditorium with the same operational attention he had carried through compounds in 3 countries. His harness read Service Dog, Do Not Pet in white letters, on a black vest, and the letters were technically accurate, but they did not begin to describe what Ranger was or what he had done. He had been Sarah's operational K-9 during her 3rd deployment. She had fought for 19 months through the military working dog adoption process to bring him home. He had arrived at the Montrose airport in a transport crate, and when the crate door opened, he had walked directly to Sarah, pressed his head into her thigh, and exhaled the way dogs exhale when something they have been waiting for has finally happened. He had not been more than 10 feet from her since. The auditorium in Ridgway High School was the kind of room that small mountain towns build when they want to believe they are investing in their children. High ceilings, blonde wood paneling, fluorescent lights that washed everything in a flat. Forgiving glow, and the faint smell of floor wax, and the particular exhaustion of a building that never fully empties. The folding chairs were arranged in rows of 20. 230 students filled them. Faculty lined the walls. The banner behind the podium read Career Day 2024 in blue and silver letters that someone had spent an afternoon taping straight. The air was warm and still, and carried the specific tension of a room in which something wrong had just happened, and no adult had yet decided to correct it. Ethan saw her first. His face did not change, not in the way the audience expected it to change. He did not smile. He did not cry. He did not look relieved. Something behind his eyes shifted, the way a compass needle shifts when it finds north, and he straightened his shoulders by a fraction of an inch that only someone who knew him would have noticed. He had sent her the message. He had not expected her to come this fast. Ranger walked beside Sarah down the center aisle. His ears were forward. His body held the low, fluid readiness of an animal who has entered a new space and is cataloging every variable before deciding which ones matter. Halfway down the aisle, his head turned toward Lieutenant Hargrove at the podium. He did not growl. He did not alter his pace, but his ears dropped fractionally, and his weight shifted forward in the way it shifted when he had identified a presence that required sustained attention. Sarah felt the change through the leash. She didn't look at Hargrove. Not yet. She walked to the front of the room. She stopped beside her son. She placed one hand on Ethan's shoulder, briefly, the way people touch things they are proud of without needing to say so, and then she turned to face the podium. Hargrove looked at her. He saw a woman in work boots and a canvas jacket with a scar on her face and a German shepherd at her side, and he made the same assessment that men like him have been making about women like her for as long as both categories have existed. He saw what he expected to see, and what he expected to see was not a threat. "Ma'am, this is a closed school event," Hargrove said. "You'll need to check in at the front office." "My name is Sarah Cole," she said. Her voice was not loud. It carried the way voices carry when the person speaking has spent years giving orders in environments where volume is a liability and clarity is the difference between living and dying. Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare. I completed BUDS S-Class 297. I deployed 4 times. I completed 50 combat missions. And the boy you just called a liar in front of his entire school is my son. The auditorium went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight and texture and that presses against the walls of a room like something physical. Hargrove's expression changed. It moved through 3 phases in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise. Recalculation. And then the particular tightening around the jaw that happens when a person who is committed fully to a position realizes they are wrong and decides to defend the position anyway. "With all due respect," Hargrove said, "the SEAL pipeline is—" "I know what the pipeline is," Sarah said. "I completed it. Class of 142 entered. 26 graduated. I was one of them." She paused. The pause was not dramatic. It was operational. She was giving him exactly the amount of time required to make his next decision. "You told my son that I lied about my service. You told him in front of 200 of his classmates. You told him that I did a disservice to the men who earned the Trident." She reached into the interior pocket of her jacket and produced a folded document. Her DD-214. The certificate of discharge that lists every assignment, every qualification, every decoration. She unfolded it. She held it at arm's length so that Hargrove could read it without stepping forward. Every mission, every deployment, every commendation, 50 operations. It's all there. Would you like to read it? Or would you like to keep telling a 14-year-old boy that his mother is a liar? Ranger stood between Sarah and the podium. He had moved into position without command, placing his body perpendicular to the line between his handler and the man whose voice had been the loudest sound in the room when they entered. He was not growling. He was not displaying aggression. He was simply present, in the way that 82 pounds of trained military canine is present when it has decided that the space around its handler belongs to him, and that entry into that space is no longer available without permission. His amber eyes were fixed on Hargrove's hands. His breathing was slow and controlled. His clipped ear, the one with the scar, was angled forward. Hargrove looked at the DD-214. He looked at Ranger. He looked at Sarah Cole's eyes, which had not moved, and which held, in their darkness, the absolute stillness of a person who has no interest in being believed, and no need to be validated, and who is simply, quietly, presenting facts to a man who is running out of room to deny them. "I didn't," Hargrove began. "You did," Sarah said. "In front of his school. In front of his teachers. In front of his friends." Her voice had not risen. It would not rise. "My son raised his hand in a room full of people and told the truth about his mother, and you humiliated him for it. That's not a mistake, Lieutenant, that's a choice." Someone in the third row exhaled audibly. A teacher near the wall uncrossed her arms and covered her mouth. In the front row, the principal leaned forward in his chair, and the expression on his face was the particular expression of an administrator who is realizing, in real time, that the situation in front of him has moved beyond the boundaries of what his usual responses can contain. Ethan stood beside his mother with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the floor now, not in shame, but in the overwhelming privacy of a 14-year-old boy who has just watched his mother walk through a door and become, in front of every person he knows, the thing he had always known she was, but had never seen anyone else believe. Ranger pressed his flank against Ethan's leg. Ethan's hand found the fur along the dog's neck and held it. Hargrove set the DD-214 down on the podium. His hands were not steady. He looked at the principal. He looked at the room. The room looked back at him with 230 pairs of eyes that had seen everything and understood it and would remember it during every interaction with this man for the rest of the time he spent in this building. "I owe your son an apology," Hargrove said. "Yes," Sarah said. "You do." He gave it. It was brief, stiff, and insufficient in the way that apologies delivered under public pressure are always insufficient. The words correct, the tone still armored, the contrition arriving too late to undo what the room had already absorbed. Ethan accepted it with a nod. He did not speak. He did not need to. His mother was standing beside him. Ranger was pressed against his leg. The auditorium was silent in the way that rooms are silent when every person in them has just learned something they didn't know about someone they thought they knew, and is still deciding what to do with it. The principal ended the career day assembly 12 minutes early. He spoke with Sarah in the hallway afterward for 20 minutes, and when he returned to his office, he made 2 phone calls, one to the district superintendent and one to the Duroc regional coordinator. Lieutenant Richard Hargrove was formally reprimanded by the school district the following week for conduct unbecoming a representative of the program. He was reassigned to administrative duties within the Duroc program and removed from all public-facing events for the remainder of the school year. 3 parents filed formal complaints. 2 faculty members submitted written statements describing a pattern of dismissive behavior toward students that predated the Cole incident by at least 2 years. Instances in which Hargrove had belittled questions, mocked answers, and used his rank as a license to humiliate young people whose only offense was not knowing things they had never been taught. He resigned from the program the following spring. He did not attend the end-of-year ceremony. No one asked him to. 7 months later, the June sun lay long and warm across the porch of the house Sarah Cole had rebuilt with her own hands on 3 acres outside Ridgeway. The San Juan Mountains stood blue and enormous against a sky so clear it looked like someone had washed it. Sarah sat in the chair with coffee, going cold in her hand, and her left knee aching the way it always ached when the barometric pressure dropped. And she watched Ranger chase a tennis ball across the yard with the unadulterated, full-bodied joy of an animal who has been given permission to be exactly what he is. His clipped ear bounced as he ran. His tail swept wide arcs through the mountain air. He brought the ball back and dropped it at Ethan's feet, and Ethan, who had grown 2 inches since December and who had recently informed her, with the casual certainty of a teenager who has made a decision, that he intended to apply to the Naval Academy when the time came, threw it again, without looking up from the book he was reading. Sarah watched them. She did not smile. Smiling was not something she did automatically, and the people who knew her had learned that the absence of a smile did not mean the absence of warmth. What she felt, sitting on that porch with the mountains in front of her and the dog running and the boy reading, was not peace in the way the word is usually used. It was something more specific than peace. It was the understanding that the things she had spent her entire career protecting, the right of any person, regardless of what the world expected them to be, to stand in a room and tell the truth about who they are, had come home with her when she left the service, and had been standing beside her son in a high school auditorium on a Tuesday morning in December, and had not flinched. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky or armies descending from the clouds. Sometimes they arrive as a woman in work boots, walking through a school auditorium door with a scarred dog beside her and a folded piece of paper in her jacket that says everything the room refused to believe. Sometimes God doesn't send rescue in the forms we recognize. He sends it in the forms we have been taught to overlook. Through people the world has already decided cannot be what they are, carrying a quiet power that needs no permission and no applause. We are not always called to prove ourselves to people who have decided not to believe us. But sometimes, on a Tuesday morning, in a room full of folding chairs and fluorescent light, we are called to stand beside the ones who told the truth on our behalf, and to show them that the truth was always enough. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that courage does not come in one shape, one size, or one uniform, and that the people the world underestimates are sometimes the ones God has placed exactly where they need to be. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you have ever stood in a room and been told that what you know about yourself isn't true, we want to hear that story. It may be the thing that helps someone else stand a little straighter tomorrow. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to be erased, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always, the truth does not need volume. It only needs someone willing to stand up and speak it.